Well, hello and welcome to my channel, The Withered Fig Tree. My name is Randy Silva. I've been doing live streams about various Christian topics. Last week I started a new series called, oh man, now I'm forgetting what it was called. Just a sec. Oh, yes, that's right. Last week I started a new series called The History of Judaism. And last week, the first episode was about how God had to create a nation. And today, I want to delve a little bit more deeply into that subject before carrying on with the story of Abraham and his children, and then the direct formation of the nation of Israel. So let's go ahead and get started. Yeah, so one of the things I talked about last week was that God works through both natural and supernatural ways. God's supernatural interventions, along with times of natural progressions, all the way from the creation of the universe, which was very supernatural, to the creation of life and humans on the planet Earth, which contained various events of supernatural. That's not the right way of saying it. Sorry. Let's see. What did I say here in my notes? Well, anyway, what I said was to the creation of the earth, to the creation of life and humans, to the creation of the Garden of Eden, to the creation of Adam and Eve as created beings, all the way to Noah and the flood. And we ended last week with the selection of Abram. Now, besides tracing these major turning points in the creation epic, I proposed a reason why God needed a nation. That's really the foundation of this series. The history of Judaism relies on God creating the Jews, creating a nation for himself. Yes, so I proposed a reason why God would need to create this nation. It was the fall of Satan and his angels, them being hurled to the earth, the fall of man through eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then those events led to the loss of their spirit, the Spirit of God that he had breathed into them, and their expulsion from the garden, which then they could no longer eat from the tree of life and live forever. If you want to think of it, that's why I have called this episode, part 2, is the falls that required a nation. So really there were two falls. There was the fall of Satan, and then there was the fall of man. And a lot of times those aren't connected. And in fact, I hadn't really connected them until I was reading Revelation chapter 12 from the prior series, which was the 7 spirits of Revelation. In chapter 12, I read, one reads how the history of Israel is intertwined with the dragon. So the woman in that chapter is Israel, the dragon is definitely Satan, and the child is the Messiah. So a couple things I want to mention up front. I want to define this term supernatural intervention because I use it a lot. Let me just go ahead and read what I have here so I don't mess up. Okay, so supernatural interventions. Here's what I mean by that. Instances in which God purposefully acts within the creation at pivotal times to redirect, accelerate, or restrain events in a way that would not arise through natural causation alone. Note that these can range from subtle, nearly imperceptible. Let me start over that one. Note that these can range from subtle, nearly imperceptible whispers to overt and unmistakably miraculous events, like the splitting of the Red Sea, for instance. From a historical standpoint, his interventions range from events that pass in total obscurity that we will never know about, but God did them, to those that are documented across multiple civilizations. But at least as far as the Old Testament is concerned, those are the events that the historians and prophets of Israel thought to include in the scriptures. Now, I had in mind last week to talk about what was outside of the garden, but I missed it. To be honest, I skipped right over it. So the question is, were there places outside of the Garden of Eden? And I think the answer is yes. One is, what's the word? Sort of obviously, they were kicked out of the garden, so they had to go somewhere, and that wasn't just like created. So there was the earth, and there were all the animals, and then the question would be, were there other people outside of the garden? And I think the answer to that is also yes. A little bit less certain. After the fall, Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel. We know that story. We know that Cain kills Abel, and his punishment is a further exile away from Adam and Eve, who had already been exiled from the garden. And it says that he was exiled to the land of Nod. So here is this other place that pre-existed or existed alongside the garden. This is recorded in Genesis chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. And then it says that Cain is concerned that other people will kill him. What other people? It's just the three of them. Well, obviously there were other people. While there are many unknowns and very significant uncertainties, a theory of mine that I have is that once humanity had evolved naturally as well as with supernatural interventions from, as we talked about last week, from a single cell to multicellular life to complex life to humans, and God intervened through all of those steps, supernaturally intervened. Yes, so while God supernaturally intervened through the creation all the way to the creation of an existence of humans, a theory that I have is that once humanity had evolved on Earth, God then created the garden as sort of a sandbox. And he also then created two people from scratch. I don't know if from scratch is the best word, but they weren't the children of any of the people, any of the humans that were outside of the garden is what I mean. And he created them as adults, so they didn't go through the maturation process, as it were. And there's a big argument about whether they had belly buttons or not. They didn't have a need for belly buttons because they were never in the womb, but maybe God just created them with belly buttons so that they wouldn't stick out from all the other humans. I don't know. We don't know. So at any rate, I have this theory that he created Adam and Eve from scratch. He modeled them after humans, or you could say he used the DNA of humans, but it was distinct. It was a distinct creation in that they were in God's image. So that would indicate that the humans outside the garden were not in God's image. And you may say, wait a second, I thought we were all created in God's image. Well, it does say that in Genesis, at the end of Genesis chapter 1 and the beginning of Genesis chapter 2, let us create mankind in our image. So does that mean that people have the, hands and feet, and God has hands and feet and a head and two eyes? Potentially. But more importantly, I think what it means is that he created us to bear his image, or he created us to have a part of his spirit, what we call the Holy Spirit, within our hearts, within our souls, within our bodies. So he created mankind with the capacity to hold a part of his spirit within them, but then he created Adam and Eve actually with that spirit. He breathed his spirit into Adam, and then he created Eve from it says from his side, which there's a whole episode on that in the Era of the Spirit series. This is just an idea that I have. I'm not really sure. It's not critical to like my overall theology or any of the series that I've done. It does, I guess you'd say, represent my current view, trying to explain some of the odd things you find in the Bible. For instance, how Cain is talking about people who were outside the garden who were going to kill them, even though the Bible doesn't directly say anything about it. And from another point of view, you can see how God created all of mankind and all the animals in Genesis 1, but then in Genesis 2, starting in verse 4, it zooms in to Adam and Eve specifically in the garden, and then it rezooms in to Adam and Eve. Then it rezooms into Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 5. That's right, Genesis chapter 5. It rezooms into Adam and Eve, and they have Seth. Okay, so I did put here that verse 20 of Genesis chapter 3 says, and this was just after the fall, Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all the living. Would become the mother of all the living. So that if that were true, then that would indicate that all human life is related to Eve, and that would also mean that the children of Adam and Eve would have to have children with each other. I don't know. So what does that mean, though? So I think that could also mean, refer back to Genesis 2:7's that God breathed his spirit, the breath of life, into them, and that they became living beings, is what it says. So I believe that this could be talking about that she became the mother of all of the spiritually living humans. So, as I mentioned today, I will delve a little bit more into the fall of Satan, the fall of man, and the cause of the flood. And as I was researching this, I ran into some very interesting things about a book called the Book of Enoch, specifically the first section of that, which is called First Enoch. And so that was very intriguing to me, so I want to share some of that. And the reason why I wanted to delve more into this is that they set the foundation as to why God created a nation, or why God needed to create a nation through which he would provide a way to redeem humanity. Not the angels, but just humanity, which is also an interesting thought to think about. Why didn't God want to reconcile the angels as well? There must be a good reason for it, right? The first set of slides is entitled The Bible versus the Book of Enoch. So Christians and Jews both hold that the Old Testament is God-inspired. Of course, the Christians go on to say that the New Testament is God-inspired, but the Jews do not. Now, throughout history, people have also written their own commentaries on the Bible in various forms. In modern times, those commentaries are, if you've ever read one, they're dry, informational, academic explanations and deep dives into various Bible topics. Really what these live streams are. Hopefully they're not, excuse me, I hit the microphone. Hopefully they're not dry, right? But this is kind of the Western culture's method for giving expositions and explaining certain parts of the scriptures which potentially are difficult to explain. Now, in Eastern cultures, commentaries also use this form, and a good example of that is the Mishnah. But they also used some other forms. One of them is called the Midrashic form, and then there's a pseudepigraphal form, and then the apocalyptic form. And we read a lot about apocalyptic form when we went through the book of Revelation, because it's almost entirely written in apocalyptic form. And then, of course, sometimes there was just mixtures of these three. Now, what the Midrashic form is that it's a way of filling in what happened between Bible verses. And in fact, often that was their exact form. They would give a Bible verse, and then they would say, here's kind of what I think happened, and then they give the next Bible verse. It's sort of what, for instance, The Chosen tries to do. If you were just to try to create a story about the Gospels and the life of Jesus, there's not a lot of details. The Bible is short insofar as that it gives just important details that God wanted us to have. And so it's acceptable for mankind to fill in those gaps as long as it fits within the frame that is set by the scriptures. And that's a lot of times when stories about Jesus or movies about Jesus go awry, is they don't try to string together the actual Bible verses. They might put a few verses here and there, but then they also have their own interpretations which go well beyond any of the verses. So now, pseudepigraphal books, is from the Greek from fake or false, and epi is on, and graphal is to write. So it's writing as if you are someone else, is what it really means. And so I put here, it refers to works that are falsely attributed to a particular author, meaning they claim the author, they claim that they are the author. This, what did I actually write? Meaning the claimed author is not the true author of the text. So you can think of First Enoch is an example of that, because it was not written by Enoch. It was written by somebody who was writing as Enoch. And maybe nowadays we'd say, hey, you can't do that. But this was an accepted form of telling stories in the Jewish culture. And I would say that they also seek to explain scriptures, but they take more liberties than this midrashic form. Now, the apocalyptic form seeks to reveal hidden mysteries. That's what that word apocalyptic means, to reveal the hidden, through vivid, climactic, symbolic imagery. And this form, when used by humans, takes the most liberties. Now, I put by humans because it appears as though God also uses this form when he tells prophecies about the future. And we talked about that in the last series as to why God would do that. The book of Enoch has 3 sections, but for this episode, I'm only going to be speaking about First Enoch. Now, First Enoch has all 3 forms. It has midrashic form insofar as it's trying to explain, for instance, it tries to explain what happens about the fall of Satan, and it tries to explain about how the Nephilim came to be and what caused the flood. So it's midrashic because it tries to explain some things about some verses that are just short and don't give a lot of information in the Bible. It's pseudepigraphal because it's definitely not written by Enoch. And it is apocalyptic as well. So it's got all 3 forms of that. Scholars believe that it was written in between 300 AD, not AD, 300 and 200 BC. And this is just First Enoch. Remember, there's a Second and Third Enoch, and those were written by a different person at different times. Now, in regard to the fall of Satan, let's look at what the Bible actually says about the fall of Satan. Now, Isaiah chapter 14 is one of the biggest sources. Verses 12 through 15, you can read that on your own. But in this section, Isaiah is specifically talking about the king of Babylon. But then he starts talking about somebody else, it seems, and how the king of Babylon is like this other person. He calls this other person the morning star or the son of dawn. It talks about how he was cast down to the earth, how his pride was off the charts. It says specifically, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. That's what this person said, or this entity. I will make myself like the Most High. And then it says he was put in the realm of the dead and the depths of the pit. So he's definitely talking about Satan here, and he's comparing the king of Babylon to Satan. How the king of Babylon shares qualities or characteristics of Satan. But in the process of it, he gives us some information. And since Isaiah is part of the Bible, it's God inspired, then we can say, hey, this is actually information that we can take with us about Satan. Now, Ezekiel 28, verses 12 through 7 has the same form. In this case, he's talking about the king of Tyre, but then he throws in this comparison and gives some more information, some more details about Satan. It says he was full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. It also says that he was in Eden, And it says that you were anointed as a guardian cherub. You were blameless till wickedness found you. And it also says that God expelled him to the earth. Now, in the New Testament, Luke chapter 10, verses 17 through 19, Jesus talks about the fall of Satan. And it's in reply to the astonishment of the 72. Remember, he sent out the 72. The 72 come back, and they're astonished that even demons submitted to them. Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. And then he says, I have given you authority to overcome all the power of the enemy. That's Jesus giving us some information. And he says that when Satan fell after this apparent war in heaven, which we'll talk about here in Revelation chapter 12, he fell hard and quick, fell like just this blast of lightning to the ground, or in this case, into the pit. Okay, so Revelation 12, Satan is called the dragon, and then it even says that this dragon, who we call Satan, so it's definitely, that one's no uncertainty there. It says it sought to destroy the woman's child, which is Jesus, but he couldn't. So then he went after the woman, the mother, who was Israel, represented by Israel. And in verses 7 through 9, it says, there was a great war in heaven where Michael and his angels fought against Satan, and Michael and his angels fought against Satan and his angels. And Satan lost, and he and his angels were thrown to the earth. Lucky us. Now, Revelation 20 also talks about, not the fall, but it says a little bit more about Satan having been released from the abyss to attack Israel through Rome. Then he's thrown back into the abyss for a symbolic period of 1,000 years. But then after this symbolic period, he must be set free for a short time. And it says the reason why he has to be set free is to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth. That means the whole earth. So that appears to be an ability that Satan has when he's not in the abyss, is that he can not just do demonic things here and there, but he can deceive the nations, which is what he did when he used Rome to destroy Jerusalem and the temple. So that's really all the Bible says about the fall of Satan. He's the archetype of pride. He fought against God and lost. He was hurled to the earth like lightning, and then he is restrained but allowed to deceive humanity at certain times. Now, about the fall of Satan, First Enoch tells us, interestingly, it's almost like it's a different story, and it is a different story. A lot of people will read First Enoch like this is another bit of the Bible that was supposed to be in there but never was put in there, but that's definitely not the case. He never mentions Satan or Lucifer by name. There's no single person who is ruling all of these fallen angels. Now it calls those fallen angels the Watchers, and it does give names to some of them. Shemhaza, Azazel. Azazel is interesting because he actually is in the Bible. So here's another tie back to the Bible from Leviticus chapter 16. Azazel is the name of the goat that bears the sins of the people. So the scapegoat, the one that's allowed to leave. And then it's scarlet, scarf or thread goes from scarlet to white, which is symbolic of God forgiving the people's sins. It's as if these demons appear as adversarial or accusatory beings, and sometimes in the plural. So it's not just one bad demonic angel, it's a bunch of them. And then First Enoch says, and you can go read this, by the way. I put a link to it in the description of this video. There is an free online copy that you can read. It's relatively short. It's 36 chapters, but each chapter is like a paragraph or two. So I would recommend reading it. It's a very interesting, fun read. So First Enoch says that it is the Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers and human women, who are utterly corrupt and require destruction in the flood. So that's where First Enoch really ties into the Bible, or tries to be midrashic. It says that here's the specific reason why. And most likely it does that because the Nephilim are described in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. And then in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, it gives the reason for why there's a flood. So they're very close, right next to each other. Then it says that the angels are bound for judgment, and but not just, not a particular person or angel like Satan, but just all of them go. Now, to make things more confusing, as I kind of already mentioned here in Leviticus chapter 16, there's other parts in the New Testament that refer to First Enoch. Now, does that make First Enoch suddenly rise to the level of God inspired? No. And even in 2 Peter and in Jude 6, those are the two places. It says, it says it right here, like in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. For if God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. So if God, he's kind of saying that we know the story of First Enoch, and we know that the point of that is that God did not spare even the angels when they sinned. And Jude 6, remember Jude is just one chapter, it's very short, so that's actually like Jude verse 6. It says that, and the angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day, which is part of what Revelation chapter 20 talks about. So this idea of angels in chains thrown into pits of darkness in Jude and 2 Peter, those are likely echoes to the Watchers tradition, and they're not like Luke chapter 10 when Jesus says Satan fell like lightning. Now, note that Lucifer is not mentioned. We all know Satan's name is Lucifer, right? If you watch the, what was it? Was it on Netflix, I think? It's called Lucifer. I can't really recommend it, but at least the first season is kind of interesting. His name is Lucifer, but he goes by Morning Star. I think it's his middle name or something like that. And there's an Azazel and other demons that are named in the book of First Enoch. So that particular show, it's an interesting premise, but it does give details that it finds in the Bible as well as in First Enoch, and then of course it makes up a lot of stuff as well. So where does Lucifer come from? It comes from the Latin translation of the Bible called the Vulgate, and it comes specifically from the translation of Isaiah 14. It calls the morning star Lucifer, which means light bearer, or it was the word that they used for Venus, or the morning star. So Lucifer used to just be a regular term that people would use for Venus and the morning star, and then very quickly after it appeared in the Bible as the name of Satan, suddenly, kind of like in the name Damien is no longer used in today's modern society, just like that, suddenly Lucifer became taboo to use as the name of your child. So the conclusion of this Bible, how we have the Bible talking about Satan or Lucifer falling, and then we also have the first book of Enoch. Genesis chapter 6 verse 5 is what puts the weight on human evil. Let me just read that. So it says, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time." So it doesn't say anything about Nephilim. It doesn't even blame Satan or anything here. This is the primary explicit reason why God says, I need to destroy everybody except for Noah, who found favor. It's because of the wickedness of the human race and how bad it had become, with every inclination of their thought being evil all the time. We might be getting back to that, or certain humans have been that way, but can you imagine all of humanity except for a couple people like Noah types, being evil all the time. Genesis chapter 6 verse 11 also says something very similar. It says, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on the earth had corrupted their ways. So he said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all the people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy them and the earth." So he tells them to build an ark. And then, of course, he does this flood. So the flood is really this great reset that brings it back to Noah, who we know is related to Adam and Eve through Seth, that it's just him and his sons, but then also their wives. So that's, I guess you could say, kind of where a little bit of evil evil DNA is still in the mix, because you have you have the sons of, or the great many times great children of Adam and Seth become the sons of Noah, but then they have wives who are from this generation who are wicked and whose every inclination. Now, hopefully, these are good guys. I'm sure Noah raised them with the fear of the Lord, right? And so they would choose women, the best of the women. You wouldn't just choose some evil woman or something like that. But nevertheless, God doesn't start like brand new with another Garden of Eden. He starts with a son of Adam and some other people, some women. Okay, let's see. Now, oh yes, I put here that the Nephilim, this comes from chapter 6, verse 4. So that just says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. So that is actually a positive reference. Nephilim are presented in a positive light. It says they were the heroes of old. Hero is usually typically a positive type of sense. I'm looking at the Hebrew. It says a mighty one, a mighty warrior, special guard. There's nothing in there about just a generally strong person. It's talking about someone that you would consider a hero, and someone who's renowned, somebody you would know about. And so there's also this idea of what on earth is the sons of God. That sounds like maybe these angels who had fallen. That's sort of how the person who wrote First Enoch took it. But most likely, sons of God are the sons of Seth, who was the son of Adam and Eve, and perhaps other children of Adam and Eve. It says that they had other children after Seth, who were different in that Adam and Eve were directly created beings, created with the indwelling of God's Spirit, at least. So up until the point of the age of accountability, this is just another idea that I put in one of the earlier series. I can't remember which one it was. It might have, actually, I think it was that first series. Maybe it was the second one. I don't know. But somewhere in my series, I talk about how Cain was different from Abel, potentially because he was the older brother and he would have reached this age of accountability where his mind is now cognizant. Is that the word? Cognizant. That's the word. Cognizant of good and evil, and now becomes responsible for his actions. And he very quickly goes the wrong direction, even though God gives him a chance. So I put here that it appears that any goodness from Adam and Eve's genes were quickly watered down within Genesis, but then also it seems as though they were watered down after the flood. But we know that God does all these things for the good of humanity and whatever he's trying to accomplish with this creation. And so God knew that he needed to supernaturally intervene, cutting off, and this is the big one. This isn't one of those subtle ones. In fact, the flood is mentioned in just about every major civilization that's out there at the time. It's part of these civilizations' history. So the flood that took and reset the earth, that was necessary in order to create a human race, a new human race, through whom one of those people, Abram, he could create a nation. Now, so what's this idea about the two falls? So the two falls, the first one is the fall of Satan. That was a spiritual rebellion that introduced deception, opposition, and hostile influence into the creation. Then you have the fall of man. That is a human moral collapse that's rooted in the knowledge of good and evil and the absence of the indwelling spirit, resulting in disobedience, corruption, and violence. So a lot of times people will ask, myself included, why on earth did God put the tree of knowledge of good and evil, this thing they're not supposed to eat from, in the garden? And I think it's just an idea that it was going to be necessary later on, but not at that time. So this Garden of Eden was like a sandbox. It was protected or somehow set apart from the rest of the world, and you could only enter in through these various gates. And we know that those gates had to be guarded to make sure Adam and Eve didn't try to sneak back in or something. And so at some point, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was going to be necessary when they reach a certain point of maturation where they could handle it, I guess you'd say. But because Satan was... So anyway, that's why I think, one of the reasons why I think the tree is there. Of course, other people will also talk about free will, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But with free will, if you don't have the choice to do something wrong, then you don't really have free will. So that's why God had to put the tree there, which makes sense. But then the real question to ask, I think, is why it's the combination of those two things. Why did God put the tree in the garden and Satan on the earth? That seems to be what is unique about the Earth's story of humanity or life, is that there was both the earth, Satan on the earth, and then this tree of knowledge of good and evil. Both of these two falls affect life on earth. Satan's fall creates the conditions. Man's fall creates the necessity. But Scripture definitely places the responsibility or the onus for the judgment on human evil, not angelic rebellion or not Satan manipulating Adam and Eve to eat from this tree. It was part of it, but they were still responsible for their actions. So redemption is directed toward humanity, not the angels. And I don't know why. You probably think that if somehow the angels that fell could be saved somehow, that Satan probably wouldn't take it, right? I don't know. Actually, if you read, again, that series on Lucifer is kind of interesting because he gets tired of torturing people, so he decides, well, I'm just going to go up to Earth and hang out. So it's kind of like, well, what would Satan be like if he had to live as a human and not the master of hell? Now I forgot what I was saying. Oh, yes. Yeah, you probably think that Satan wouldn't take the bait, but maybe some of the other angels might. Maybe he deceived some of those angels and they could be saved. Who knows? It's just like God has given humans the ability to be saved, but he didn't just save everybody. He's given that opportunity to be saved. So in Hebrews chapter 2, it says, since the children have, I think this is actually verses 2 through 3. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. This last slide I want to talk about quickly, more from I don't want to say philosophical or theological standpoint, I guess. But why does God have to intervene? Does that show that there's something wrong? And the answer is no. It does not imply a defective creator or creation. the idea is that the creation was designed to be open, not closed. God did not create a deterministic, that's a hard one to say. God did not create a deterministic machine, but a dynamic system capable of divergence, growth, and history. And freedom, that's one of the big points. Free will, freedom is necessary. It necessarily introduces contingency. Once beings with genuine free will exist, human or angelic outcomes are no longer guaranteed without some sort of guidance or prodding or intervening, as I've been saying. So intervention preserves freedom rather than negating it. God's actions redirect history without overriding the agencies of the created beings themselves. And complex systems require guidance. All of our complex systems require guidance. It's not constant control. They operate under certain rules, but at various times, because of their complexity and because of the chaos of the system, they require guidance. And in this world, this universe of immense complexity, small, well-timed interventions can shape long-term outcomes more effectively than brute force. So you can think of it kind of as the butterfly effect, that just a small, in a chaotic system, just a small change can have a large impact down the road. And God, not being in our dimension, being able to see the future, know the future, he knows when interventions need to be made and what those interventions need to be. So God remains involved in the creation because of relationship, not independence. That has always been the goal. And redemption itself is an intervention from within. God does not erase humanity's path, but enters it, culminating in the incarnation and the sending of the Holy Spirit. Hopefully you found that interesting. I found it very interesting talking about the Book of Enoch. Remember, you can go ahead and read it. The link is in the description. Next week, we will get back to talking about Abraham and, well, actually Abram and how he becomes Abraham and how he becomes the father of a nation. Thanks again for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and please share this with your friends, and have a great evening.